Yoga of Self-Perfection. This is a part of a series of talks given at the Madhapur Sri Aurobindo Study Circle in Hyderabad in 2017.
ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्। So we are on chapter 11 of Yoga of Self-Perfection in the Synthesis of Yoga. The theme that flows through the entire Yoga of Self-Perfection is a fourfold theme that Sri Aurobindo outlines in the early chapters. The fourfold theme is purification, liberation, perfection, and delight. In chapters 6 and 7, he talks about purification of prana, manas, and buddhi, the vital energies, prana, the heart, manas, and the discriminating intelligence faculty, which is buddhi, and mind in general. So that was the purification, which was the first limb, if you will. And then came liberation in two chapters 8 and 9. There was the liberation of spirit, Purusha, and predominantly the theme in that chapter was desire and ego. And then there was liberation of Prakriti, which was predominantly centered around Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, the three gunas that are natural to us. And in the last chapter that we covered, the 10th chapter, Sri Aurobindo says, it is when the Purusha is purified and the nature, Prakriti, is liberated, then spiritual perfection becomes possible. And he goes on in the previous chapter to highlight 6 elements of perfection, and the first of those elements was equality. So that was till chapter 10. Chapters 11, 12 and 13 now go on to discuss in more detail this first element of perfection that he highlighted, which is equality. So Sri Aurobindo begins the chapter by a very simple, straightforward declaration for all spiritual seekers. The very first necessity for spiritual perfection is a perfect equality. The very first necessity for spiritual perfection is perfect equality. The supreme divine nature is founded on equality. And when he says spiritual perfection, he elaborates more on the word perfection, which relates to this entire section of Yoga of Self-Perfection. What is perfection? Perfection means a growth out of a lower undivine into a higher divine nature. Simple definition. Perfection means a growth out of a lower undivine nature, which is the animal nature, which is what is the raw material from which man has been made, into a higher divine nature. That is the destination of man. We want to manifest divinity at some level. Perfection in terms of knowledge is putting on the being of a higher self and casting away of the darker, broken self. Man is a mental being In life, stage after stage, he accumulates knowledge, he accumulates a better understanding of life, a better understanding of world. But for a spiritual seeker, perfection in terms of knowledge means putting on the being of the higher self and casting away of the darker, broken, lower self, consciously working towards living up to the highest standards that we know at our level of consciousness to be the right levels from which we have to live. We do not do wrong things knowingly justifying them. We live up to the higher level of consciousness. That is an attempt at perfection in terms of knowledge. Perfection in terms of devotion, growing into a likeness, the law of the being of the divine, to be united with whom we aspire. In the traditional paths, as we seek the divine, there are 4 or 5 different levels of liberation that we talk about. We talk about Salokya Mukti, Sarupya Mukti, Sadharmya Mukti, Sayujya Mukti, and so on. Essentially, each of these is a gradation where we consciously work towards approaching the Lord. And how do we work? We try to manifest as much as possible the attributes of the Lord, the similarities with the Lord. We try to live with them, we try to manifest them. And we say, would the Lord behave this way? Would the divine behave this way? And then we try to eschew and stop the lower nature from manifesting because of our devotion to the God. We know our God doesn't like these things, so we don't do it. So in this path also, we try to approach the God as close as possible by giving up of the lower nature. However, in the case of integral yoga, and in particular when we look at the yoga of self-perfection here, and you will see this theme come up again later also in the rest of this chapter, there is a greater emphasis laid in integral yoga on the transformation of our human nature. Our job is to ensure that every element that is defective, that is contrary to our spiritual aspiration, is identified. But when we identify it, we don't try to suppress it or reject it completely. We will try to transform it eventually. Initially, we may still say suppress it for some time, but the eventual manifestation of that attribute is with its transformed characteristic. And going further, talking about equality, Sri Aurobindo says, the master of things cannot be affected or troubled by the reaction of things. If he were, he would be subject to them and not master. So when there are things, circumstances, people in and around us, when we arrive at a divine stature of equality, that at that divine stature, the master is not troubled by what goes on around, because once there is a sign of trouble, once there is a sign of agitation, once there is a sign of restlessness, that means that we are subject to that circumstance. We are in control of that circumstance. We are not in control of that circumstances. That circumstance is controlling us. If we allow the other person to irritate us and beyond a point get restless, that means that other person has more control on us than we have on that circumstance. The truth of all things is in the calm of their depths, not in the shifting, inconstant wave on the surface. The Supreme Conscious Being, in His divine knowledge and will and love, governs their evolution. In the heights of the spiritual being, we perceive that whether in the silence of the self or in the action in the cosmos, the divine is always Satchidananda, an infinite existence, an infinite consciousness, and an infinite bliss. We ourselves begin to dwell in an equal light, strength, and joy. Two things he is pointing out here is that very often when we live in this world and we interact with people, we react rather than respond. And we are often carried away by the ping pong of life. And that in a way misses the truth of things. Because Sri Aurobindo says the truth of things, the truth of all things, is in the calm of their depths. Somewhere along the way, instead of a reaction from surface, a spiritual person should have the capability to absorb the shock of the interaction, but not react from the surface mind or the surface emotion. The idea is to take it as it comes, but not project oneself out. A perfect equality of our spirit and nature is a means by which we can move back from the troubled, ignorant outer consciousness into this inner kingdom of heaven. So, how do we react from this calm, from this depth? He said that the truth is in the depth. So, how do we move from the outer consciousness to this depth of the being? We can move back through what process? By a perfect equality. A perfect equality of Purusha and Prakriti. A perfect equality of our spirit and nature is a means by which we can move back from the outer consciousness to the inner consciousness and then possess the spirit's eternal kingdoms, Rajyam Samriddham, of greatness, peace and joy. The self-elevation in the divine, to the divine nature is the complete fruit of the discipline of equality demanded from us by the self-perfecting aim of yoga. A perfect equality and peace of the soul is indispensable to change the whole substance of our being into the substance of our self, out of its present stuff of troubled mentality. So, when we discussed a little bit of basis of yoga also, we kept on revisiting one important theme that Sri Aurobindo says that peace is the foundation on which a spiritual temperament can be built. He says without peace you may have great experiences, great realizations, but there is no foundation on which to hold that spiritual temperament. So here he brings back that word, peace. He says a perfect equality and peace of the soul is indispensable to change the whole substance of our being into the substance of ourself. A divine action or even a perfect human action is impossible if we have not the equality of spirit and the equality in the motive forces of our nature. The divine is equal to all, an impartial sustainer of his universe, who views all with equal eyes. In these passages, this one and the next one, we get a glimpse of how perhaps Sri Aurobindo and some of the rishis and munis that we have had in our pantheon, how did a sage look at the world? We can understand from these passages. The divine is equal to all, an impartial sustainer of his universe, who views all with equal eyes. God does not create in passion of desire or preserve through an attachment, or destroy in a fury of wrath. Look at the beautiful poetic way that he describes, because we talk of three phases of the universe: creation, preservation, and destruction. These are the three phases of the universe. In Hindu mythology, we have the Holy Trinity: Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva or Rudra the destroyer. So here he says, God does not create in a passion of desire, He does not preserve through attachment, nor does He destroy in a fury of wrath. The divine deals with great and small, just and unjust, ignorant and wise as the self, with a perfect understanding, power, and justness of proportion. The divine action does not spring from any kind of attachment. The divine action does not take into account the human calibration of the world. Somebody is a big person, somebody is a small person. Somebody is powerful, therefore we react differently to him. Somebody is weak, therefore we react differently to him. Somebody is a morally righteous man, somebody is a wicked murderer. The divine does not make these distinctions. The divine does not react based on these distinctions. There is a much larger, much greater, much more perfect understanding, power, and justness of proportion. There is a completely different perspective of the divine of the world. One of the elements of such vision is, at any given moment, we see what exists in front of us now at this moment. In the divine vision, and again Sri Aurobindo revisits this in the supramental time sense also. For the divine, what is visible is what is present now, what was the past that brought this present to where it is now, and where is the present leading up to in future. All of that is visible. So the action of the divine is not as narrow as we have today in terms of what is here and now. There was once a person who had heard of the mother, and he knew some people in the ashram. And as it turns out, this person was accused of murder. This person was accused of murder. And he was genuinely innocent. And he kept writing to the mother, "Please save me, I did not do this. I am telling you this is a fact and you are supposed to be the divine mother." This went to the mother, and the person who was a friend or who was taking his letter eventually asked the mother, "Mother, can you save him? Is he saying the truth when he says he did not commit this?" And the mother is believed to have said that yes, he did not commit this murder in this life. But something in the past had an association with the activity. And somewhere there is a catching up that is happening. We could not understand it. We cannot understand it. And if somebody were like me, his lawyer, defending with all my passion and vigor, I would be defending him because that is my human vision. The Supreme's vision is very different. Similarly, an act of kindness on a person who is not supposedly either moral or ethical or devoted this time, we don't know where it comes from. There are tales and tales and stories in spiritual lore where a guru bestows a tremendous amount of love and affection on a disciple who at one point looks like undeserving in our eyes. There was a girl in the ashram, I believe, that mother used to send a flower to her every day through a sadhak. Every day, a flower would go from the mother with blessings to that particular girl. And The sadhak would give the flower and naturally he would see. And one day he or she came back to the mother and said, "Mother, you are so solicitous, you are sending this every day without fail. But the girl who is receiving it does not have that bhakti. She doesn't seem to value what you are doing." And somewhere either mother has said it or the commentary that I read said it, saying that perhaps the day the girl realizes its value, the mother would not need to send the flower anymore, because the mother is working on awakening a deeper consciousness in that person. So what meets the human eye is very different than what meets the divine's perspective of creation and us as these infinitesimal beings in that creation. The self-perfecting individual must enlarge himself out of the egoistic and partial views and motives of the human ignorance and mold himself into an image of this supreme equality. We also have to work and gradually move out of a certain narrowness of view. It is human tendency that we go out of the way for people whom we have a higher regard for. We don't perhaps care as much for people who may or may not be useful for us in future. This is the ingrained temperament we carry. But in the eyes of the divine, all creatures, human and otherwise, have equal role to play in this creation and are equally important. A wise impersonality, again we get into this divine vision a little bit more. A wise impersonality, a quiescent equality, a universality which sees all things as manifestations of the divine, the one existence. This is the divine consciousness that Sri Aurobindo is talking about, a wise impersonality, a quiescent equality, which sees all things as the manifestations of the divine, the one existence, is not troubled, angry, impatient with the way of things, or, on the other hand, excited, over-eager and precipitate, but sees that the law must be obeyed and the pace of time respected. Observes and understands with sympathy the actuality of things and beings. The idea is that each of us is conditioned in some ways by our way of life, and particularly in the present capitalism-driven environment where 3-4 prominent things stand out. One, the design of capitalism is such that at every level in the hierarchy, profit motive, result orientation is the key, and therefore minimum input, maximum output. Fewest number of people driven to the maximum extent to derive maximum profit. And what it is translated to through globalization is that everybody is busy everywhere. People may think that in New York and Manhattan there is no time and everybody is rushing around, but when you go to perhaps eastern part of the world like India and China, life is at a slower pace. This was the fallacy I was under when I lived in the US also. Then I came to Delhi and I realized that my life in Delhi was no different than my life in the US in terms of the pace, because I was working equally hard. I was working for a multinational company with the same work ethic. And on top of that, the infrastructure in India does not support that pace of life. So it was causing a double whammy for me. And I used to think perhaps people in Andhra and Hyderabad and some of these places had a more peaceful life. And then I traveled to a small town where my brother and sister-in-law stay, and I find that in that small town also both of them are working, and each of them is getting up at 5 in the morning and they're busy till 10 in the evening because that is demanded of their jobs today. So the truth is, all of us across the globe have gotten used to this frantic movement through the day. Immediate result is required, immediate output is required, tremendous pressure is put on us. So our entire consciousness now is morphed through this grinder and mixer of time pressure. And now we have become that. We have become these people who are constantly under pressure of time, running, wanting to see immediate result, having no time to step back and look at the universe. This kind of pressure narrows our consciousness. It fragments our consciousness. It does not allow us to expand our consciousness. It does not allow us to see the unity of human race. And in a way, this pressure is not conducive to the evolution of our consciousness unless we are very careful to cultivate other elements during our daily routine which will allow us to expand our consciousness. So our present state of consciousness is naturally, it is troubled, it is impatient, it is excited, it is eager, it precipitates, and we are constantly looking at immediate gratification, whether it is work result, whether it is home, whether it is whatever. We have to cultivate the opposites because we have to observe and understand with sympathy the actuality of things and beings. We should have the capability to look also behind the present appearance to the inner significance and forward to the unrolling of the divine possibilities. This is the first thing demanded of those who would do works as perfect instruments of the divine. Look at where we are and look at where we need to be. A complete reversal, a complete change of our consciousness is demanded of us. We have to realize that the hurried, frantic pace has to be counterbalanced with perhaps a meditation, perhaps a pranayam, perhaps a reading of the works of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, perhaps a certain satsang and socializing with like-minded people who can allow us to understand the larger perspective of life. Fortunately, today we have a lot of videos on YouTube which allow you to do satsang even while you're in the commute. So you can do that. The idea is we need to counterbalance this frantic pace by latching on to other elements throughout the day where we are able to retain the larger perspective of life. Similarly, as we wish to expand consciousness, we have to focus on universal harmony. When we are in a hurry to achieve a result, we don't have tolerance for opposite points of view. That creates disharmony. The idea is, how do you cultivate harmony? There is a good amount of work that is demanded of us if we have to develop this equality in this day and age. The reason I made this comment on capitalism was because when we were predominantly an agrarian economy, when human race was driven primarily by hunting and gathering, when you looked at a farmer's life, whether it was in Europe or anywhere else, he was busy for perhaps 4 to 6 months in a year. The remaining 4 to 6 months in a year or 8 to 6 months in a year, he was not frantically working morning to evening. There was adequate pace of balance. So those months you would have family gatherings, get-togethers, enjoying of life, taking things. Today we are so hectic that we don't have time for anything else other than me and my immediate family. And even our vacations are so hectic that when you come back from our vacation, you need another vacation to recover from that vacation. This is the sordid state of affairs to which we have come, and that is where we have to work on us. Now Sri Aurobindo comes back to a phrase that he used in some of the earlier chapters. As we discussed in one of the earlier sessions, there are different frameworks that one comes across in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. And each framework has a certain spiritual truth behind it. That is why Sri Aurobindo gives it to us, and we have to dwell and deepen our knowledge and understanding of this framework. There is a framework of Swarat and Samrat. We discussed it earlier also. I mean, as an easier example of frameworks, for example, aspiration, rejection, surrender. It is a framework. It is a framework of sadhana. Physical, vital, mental. It is a framework of understanding our own self. Now, in spiritual progress, there is a framework he refers to as Swarat and Samrat. Swarat is somebody who has complete self-mastery. Not just self-control, self-mastery. Full self-mastery. And Samrat is someone who has that mastery not only over himself, but because of his spiritual height, he has that spontaneous control over the circumstances and environment around him. He is such an evolved soul, so connected to the universe, that the universe itself attunes itself to this individual. Then that person evolves to become Samrat. So Sri Aurobindo discusses that a little bit. The aim of a human perfection must include two things: self-mastery, Swarat, and a mastery of surroundings, Samrat. To be a self-ruler, Swarat, is not possible for him if he is subject to the attacks of the lower nature, pleasure and pain, likings and dislikings, emotions and passions, and egoism. All these things are the slavery to the lower self, which the greater I in man must put under his feet if he is to be the king of his own nature. So he's pointing out how equality is very central to an individual in his journey of self-mastery. If the person does not have that samatha, equanimity, he gets thrown left and right by circumstances or other people's reactions. He is no longer a master of himself, which means he cannot arrive at the spiritual freedom that is desirable for a Swarat state of consciousness. Farther, one who is not a self-ruler cannot be a master of his surroundings. The knowledge, the will, the harmony, which is necessary for the outer mastery, can come only as a crown of the inner conquest. So unless we do the first part, we cannot come to the second part. It is a gradual evolution of consciousness, opening to the universal forces and nature. And for an individual to be able to develop this equality, Madhav Panditji points out in his writing on this particular topic that for complete Swarat state of consciousness, for complete self-mastery, one has to have passive equality, one has to have active equality. We touched upon this briefly in the previous session also. Passive equality is when different things are happening to us, we don't react, we are able to absorb without reaction or feeling bad. There is an equanimity that is absorbing the shocks of life. There are people who are able to not react when somebody says something nasty to them immediately, but most people react immediately to that. This is a sign of passive equality where you are able to absorb that shock. But also, once a certain maturity comes in the passive equality, in the action in the world and in the activities in the world also, the person develops a certain equality. In the outward action also, the equality comes through. That becomes the active equality part. There has to be an equality of perception and then an equality of reaction, both. And that is when the passive and active equality are manifested in us. The ideal of yoga takes up this aim of Swarajya and Samrajya and puts it on a large spiritual basis. We understand self-mastery, right? Whenever we look at ourselves, we see a lot of imperfections. We say, no, I have to outgrow this, I have to outgrow that. And equality helps us in arriving at this. But what is this Samrajya business? How do we understand it? There is one example that I can recall reading. Once, when Sri Aurobindo was in his body, there was a storm in Pondicherry. And everywhere the water, rain splattering, windows going, making all that noise. You can understand a storm. And the mother, wherever she was, realized that Sri Aurobindo's room would be impacted and he would be busy in his work. So naturally, somebody needs to look after. So she rushed to Sri Aurobindo's room. And there she finds a quiet, calm atmosphere pervading the entire room. And that calmness doesn't even allow you to realize that there is a storm brewing outside. This is how the entire atmosphere was completely imbued with Sri Aurobindo's consciousness. And there is a static, it is like a beautiful bubble of peace and calm and silence and everything in the middle of this huge raging storm. But that is how the consciousness of an evolved being is. The Panchabhutas also are under his consciousness and they attune themselves to his consciousness. The 5 forces of nature, 5 elements of nature. Now, we now move from one section of this chapter to the next section of this chapter. You remember earlier when we talked about the 4-fold process that goes on in this section of Synthesis of Yoga, we talked about purification, liberation, perfection and delight. Right now we are in perfection. This is the perfection of equality. In the purification section, what did Sri Aurobindo talk about? There were 2 chapters in which he talked about purification of prana, more specifically psychical prana, but prana, and then purification of manas and buddhi. When you read Sri Aurobindo, you find that he writes maybe 1,000 pages, but there is a beautiful structure across these 1,000 pages. He lays out a clear canvas in the beginning of that particular topic, and he says these are the 10-12 things, and as you go through, each of them is gradually taken up and studied. Now we talked about purification of prana, manas and buddhi, and now he talks about equality relating to prana, equality relating to manas, equality relating to buddhi. Because we as spiritual seekers have to work on each of these elements. We talked about purification of these 3 elements. Now he is bringing in the perfection of these 3 elements by development of equality. It is difficult to step back when you are reading 1,000 pages, but when you step back, you find that, my God, there is such a beautiful structure to all of this. And you kind of miss the trees for the forest thing. When you step back, you see the structure that he has laid out. So now he takes us, we talked about purification of manas, prana and buddhi. Now we talk about the liberation. And the first step of liberation being equality. The first obvious step to equality will be the conquest of our emotional and vital being. The equality in these parts of our nature comes by purification and freedom. So he is referring back to the earlier chapters. Purification. We might say that equality itself, is the very sign of liberation. So this is how important it is. So what prevents this vital from being liberated? Desire is the impurity of the prana. A free prana means a content and satisfied life soul. So we come back to our familiar friends, and it is almost as if we go and play every Sunday and we come across the same friends. Desire, ego, prana, manas, buddhi, the same set of friends that we have with us everywhere, and we have to work with them for our evolution. Desire is the impurity of prana. A free prana means a content and satisfied life soul. Now, there was a friend of mine who was a spiritual seeker in his own right. And in the evolution of technology, it has become very easy to send New Year greetings to literally thousands of people and receive New Year greetings from thousands of people. And in India we go through Diwali and then New Year, and we say, may there be prosperity, may there be wealth, may there be joy, may there be happiness. This person would unfailingly send his New Year greeting saying that, may this year bring you contentment. It might at one level sound strange or even insulting, but the truth of the matter is, if one quality should be cultivated for happiness and joy in life, which is the pursuit of everybody, contentment should be that first quality, because the truth of the matter is, most of us at any rate, is anybody whom has the opportunity to think of spiritual things, we are already blessed with a lot of things. We just don't take it into account, we take it for granted. So, without contentment, you get craving. Craving and contentment are opposites of each other. This feverish, wild pursuit of wealth and acquisition inherently is in some way an opposite of contentment. It does not mean to say that a man should not pursue life to the utmost possibility that life offers him. One should pursue, but one should pursue it with an element of equality and contentment built into it. One should pursue it with a detachment where failure does not depress us or subdue us. One has to moderate the feverish seeking so that health, family, money have a balance between them, so that children do not suffer, so that parents do get a certain time from you to take care of them. That is the harmony and balance. And that can only come if one has contentment and says, I am so lucky, I have received so much more than what I anticipated when I started this journey of life. I have already far exceeded what I had ever thought I would achieve. Now, let me moderate my life and pursue what I need to pursue in a meaningful way. So that is the importance of contentment. And when you have that contentment, it is a very liberating feeling. Believe me, even a drop of it, if one can carry just for one day, you will suddenly find that 100 kilos of burden has been relieved from you, because you now live like a child who has come to this little garden and the parent has left the child for an hour in that garden, and you are running around with these butterflies and flowers and squirrels. Just that one conscious contentment element can make you liberated in a big way from the weight of life. And we don't realize it at all. And many of us lead an entire life without experiencing this even for a moment. What does this contentment do? And how does it reflect? Contact of outward things without desire. We don't have any desire. Oh, I've met so and so, he may be useful for me in my future contacts to do business. Oh, I've met so and so, he may be able to give me some money for my pet project. Oh, I've met so and so, he has a good network of friends, so now I can become this influential person, page 3 personality. The hidden motives no longer play a role. And what happens is, when outward things come, we receive them with an equal response. All that comes to us from the world, all that comes to the soul, all that comes to it from the world, it will refer to higher principles, to the light, calm, and joy of the spirit. Presently, I joked in one of the earlier sessions that we are Fevicol specialists. We apply this glue all over the body and go out into this world. Whatever we like, we stick on to ourselves. Whatever we don't like, we develop antipathy towards it and then stick on to ourselves, because it is there still. We have not left it there. oh, this is a bad thing, let me, no, how can he say that to me? So I've stuck it on to myself. So we are the super glue specialists. We keep on sticking all these things to us in this world. And in the very fundamental scripture related to yoga called Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, in Yama and Niyamas, one of the basic things he talks, Ahimsa Satyasteya Brahmacharya Aparigraha. Aparigraha. Grabbing onto something is parigraha, holding onto it. Aparigraha is letting it go. The attitude of a spiritual seeker says the very first scripture of yoga that ever came into this world, do not have this attitude of grasping and craving. Aparigraha. Live without that attribute inside of you. And today human consciousness is full of parigraha, the opposite tendency. Even when those of us who come to spiritual path, we also have that tendency in us. I mean, even I do, today when I see somebody whom I meet, I will say, maybe this person can donate to our center to improve the center, the project that we have taken up. Even that has to go. Even that has to go. And this is how we move towards equality in this vital being, Sri Aurobindo here also refers to the first shloka of Ishopanishad.
Exactly, that came to my mind when you said, do not covet.
Do not covet, exactly.
Or lose his wealth.
It goes, Ishavasyam idam sarvam yatkincha jagatyan jagat tena tyaktena bhunjita magrida kasya svidhanam. And Sri Aurobindo's translation of that is, all this is for habitation by the Lord, whatsoever is individual universe of movement in the universal motion. By that renounced, thou should enjoy. Lust not after any man's possession. There is a cosmic view given here, saying that there is a universal motion and then there is the individual motion within that universal motion. In other words, everything that exists in this cosmos is for the habitation of the Lord. It is imbued with the Lord. It is meant for the divine enjoyment. With that attitude, you should enjoy what is given to you. And do not covet what is given to others. Don't compare. It is amazing how spiritual scriptures also came back and said, don't run after other man's possessions. When you look at commandments also, do not covet another man's property, another man's wife. 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and somehow we have successfully remained the same. Go ahead, you're saying something.
Rabindranath Tagore's brother, Maharishi Devendranath was there. So he once said that if somebody understands the meaning of this line, and suppose he forgets everything in the Upanishad and he remembers only this part, and if he has understood and assimilated it, is as good as knowing all of the...
He is a yogi. If we are able to manifest the truth of this one shloka, we have arrived at a yogi status of consciousness. And also, two things that are important that talk about vital being. Actually, multiple things are coming to the mind. One of the other things, we talked about contentment. And earlier, we referred to creation, preserving and destroying. Right? When we are talking of prana, the vital being, one of the most interesting characteristics of vital being, our pranic element, is it likes constant action. It wants constant action. The most difficult thing for the vital nature in us, the pranic nature in us, is to have a steady routine which is completely predictable, which is completely monotonous for a prolonged period of time. It doesn't like it. And this is the pitfall of many people who come to sadhana. When they come to spiritual life, the initial turning is full of aspiration. The aspiration has two elements. There is a genuine psychic and spiritual element to it because you are turning towards the divine. But there is also this huge engine of vital energy that is enjoying something new, that is discovering something new, that is coming into a new path. And therefore there is a huge vital energy that comes. And we are all very happy and we have these wonderful experiences. We have these wonderful, things, new people. 3 months pass, 6 months pass, 1 year passes. Now that excitement phase is over. Now what are you supposed to do? Ideally, every day, if you can, do about 20 to 30 minutes of meditation. Every day, please read maybe a few pages of Synthesis or Life Divine or Savitri. Every day, do a little bit of pranayam. Maybe every day, sit in front of the mother's picture and see if you can spend some time in communion with her. So now you don't have any adventure left. It is a small, steady routine, day after day after day, and people don't enjoy it. The vital being starts shaking. It doesn't like it. It starts revolting. The most difficult part in this creation, preserving and destruction, I don't know, but certainly compared to creation, preserving is the preservation part. Because it's very boring. Simply, it's boring. It doesn't have any excitement. People want change, and a spiritual sadhak has to learn that he has to apply equality here also. Most of the work is grunt work, predictable, slow, methodical, prolonged. And there were sadhaks like me who were having very big difficulty in such things in the ashram. So one day one such sadhak sent a message to Sri Aurobindo saying, this predictable routine is not my cup of tea. How can I do the same thing morning to evening every day again and again? No, change routine day after day, week after week. So somebody took that message to Sri Aurobindo and Sri Aurobindo said, well, if this person wants, I'm not quoting him, I'm paraphrasing him. If this person wants excitement and change and all of that, he should go join the circus, not the ashram. So we all have to learn. The real work does not happen in the excitement of beginning or the excitement of destruction or whatever that feeling of destruction that happens. It is the ability to do the same boring thing again and again and again and again. And it is not only for spiritual field, this applies to a lot of fields. You go to a financial planner and he will tell you the most successful wealth creators were not those people who bought when the market was low, sold when the market was high, somehow caught this penny stock, somehow managed to get this multi-bagger. No. The real wealth creation happens when you do what you need to do, put it there and watch it boringly for 10 years. Then you get real wealth creation. This is what a financial planner will tell you. Similarly, in the spiritual wealth creation also, it is the boring work that one might find day after day where your vital is saying, no, you have put me in this cage, you have tied me to these chains of meditation and pranayam. We have to continue to work steadily in this, even when there is no vital excitement. The second aspect that Madhav Panditji points out is when you talk of equanimity, we may think that we need to develop equanimity in these big testing moments of life. When some crisis happens, have I remained equanimous? Madhav Panditji points out that it is actually not at those moments that you have to cultivate equanimity. It is in the day-to-day small moments that you have to cultivate equanimity. And when you do that, eventually when the big crisis comes, you don't have to be even aware, automatically you will be carried through. When somebody disagrees with you, when somebody shouts at you, when somebody insults you, when somebody blames you for something that you feel is not yours, your problem. When these negative movements happen, how are you reacting? This is equanimity. And one has to work on these elements carefully. Then comes the equanimity and equality pertaining to the heart. We talked about the three elements, no? Manas comes next. Prana, Manas and Buddhi. So Manas. A free heart is similarly a heart delivered from the storms of passions. The ego sense, which induces us to act as separate beings, is responsible for these aberrations. So earlier he discussed the desire element, now he is discussing the ego element. So our two friends have come to the party, ego and desire. When we live in unity with the divine in ourselves, these imperfections fall away from us and disappear in the calm and equal strength and delight of the inner spiritual experience. Always, that is within us and transforms the outward touches before they reach it by a passage through a subliminal psychic soul in us, which is the hidden instrument of its delight of being. In the path of Sri Aurobindo, he points out that the heart chakra and the location of the psychic being are very close to each other in this region. The heart chakra, the emotional chakra, is on the more surface level when you start going in, and behind it is the psychic element. The psychic element can be superficially understood as perhaps the Atma or the soul, though there are finer distinctions. But you cannot get to the true soul. And often when people meditate on the heart chakra, the emotional outpouring that comes out is mistaken for the delight of the psychic, and that should not be the case. Eventually, as we go deeper and deeper, the delight of being comes from the psychic element. By equality of the heart, we get away from the troubled desire soul on the surface. And this equality opens the gates of this profounder being, brings out its responses, and imposes their true divine values on all that solicits our emotional being. So, instead of reacting from the emotional center, as we purify our emotions and we go deeper into the psychic being, when we interact with the world, our psychic being begins to respond. Our psychic being starts giving responses. And these are the true responses. The psychic being gives the right guidance in life. The psychic being's guidance comes from the divine truth of ourselves and of all the circumstances and people around us. A mind can be deceived, an emotion can be misdirected, but the psychic guidance can never go wrong. The more we work on the psychic sadhana, the more we do the sadhana of the psychic being, the more we go deep and let that guidance come to us, it will give us the true path of spiritual progress in our life. In this, and one of the important things that Sri Aurobindo points out, both for the prana and for the emotions, is that the path of integral yoga is not about killing the emotions. It is not about subduing the prana. It is about trying to ensure that these elements are transformed, not killed. So that has to be kept in mind. And then Sri Aurobindo talks about, while referring to the emotions, he brings out another element where he says, a large universal love will replace the claimant egoistic love of little joys and griefs. Grief will cease to exist, but a universal sympathy will take its place. Even the other emotions of grief and violence, anger, all of those also are transformed. There will be no wrath or hatred, as he pointed out, but a strong Rudra energy of the divine which can battle without hatred and destroy without wrath. See, it is so contrary to our own experience. Even They say at this level of consciousness, even when you destroy something, you destroy it knowing that it is a part of you, knowing that it is a part of the divine. In the small book, The Mother, in the section The Four Powers of the Mother, talking about Mahakali, Sri Aurobindo says, her hands are outstretched to strike and to succor. For she too is the mother. So beautifully he writes. So on one hand, she will destroy the elements inside of us that are standing on the path of spiritual progress. And it is us. It is a part of us. But she will also console us like a true mother, saying that it's okay, that had to be destroyed for you to grow spiritually. And then comes the equality of the mind and intelligence, buddhi. The ordinary mental standards will be exceeded on the basis of this dynamic equality. The mental standards, the ethical and moral standards, good and bad, right and wrong, are exceeded in the equality. The seeker of a greater perfection will draw back from all these dualities and regard them with an equal eye and arrive through equality at an impartial universal action of the dynamic tapas, spiritual force. The human being operates primarily using the mind. The mind is the basis for our existence today, so much so that we can say that man has conquered this world based on mind as his primary faculty. Anything we do it after a little bit of thinking in a logical way. But there are gradations of mind. Some minds are chiseled, perfected, and when you see the application of the mental faculty of Sri Aurobindo and the logic that flows across 1,000 pages, you see what level of intellectual capacity must be there behind structuring a thought and writing repeatedly, chapter after chapter, month after month, section after section, at the same time retaining a continuity that is spanning over 2 years or 3 years, without all the fancy computer equipment that we have today where you create a table of contents, keeping beside you, you write. No. He was just sitting in front of a typewriter and typing. That is all he did. And then you see the superstructure that is laid on top of 75 chapters in 4 different sections, and an unmistakable thread running through all of it. And then we look the various mental faculties. You find that a lot of humanity today has mind, but it does not have a disciplined mind capable of structured logical thinking. I would go to this extent, and I know I'm going out on a limb here based on my personal comment here. I find that 60 to 70% of humanity today does not have a disciplined thinking process. But they have a mind, and they're very articulate. But when you see the thoughts and expressions, you find tremendous amount of confusion. But because articulation is easy in the age of Facebook, you find this scattered all over, and you kind of say, who could write such nonsense? There is more passion than thought in that. But such is the nature of mind, and we come to a spiritual path, particularly the path of Sri Aurobindo. It is important to work on our mental faculty. It is important. One cannot go purely by the bhakti element. It will help in understanding Sri Aurobindo also in a better way. While there are different ways of reading Sri Aurobindo, there is a psychic way of reading Sri Aurobindo, there is a devotional way of reading Sri Aurobindo. I also read Savitri, not necessarily using my mental faculty, but opening at a different level. So there are different ways of reading. But a disciplined mind is extremely necessary when you are trying to make, a spiritual progress in integral yoga, where mind also is a part of our yogic perfection. And here Sri Aurobindo says, this equality is the most difficult, the equality of the mind and the thoughts, is the most difficult of all and the least practiced. He himself writes it. We all have the mental faculty, But he says that equality of mind is the least practiced and the most difficult. Our mind is like this little leaf on a tree, or perhaps not even on a tree, in the middle of a storm. That is our mind. And he says we have to develop equality here. We have to work on it. So how do we do that? At least we should develop the will for arriving at that equality. We have to tell ourselves that I will not speak out of turn, I will not react out of turn, I will not jump into a mode of expression. I will try to control myself. I will try to develop a strong will for equality. And a part of this discipline could also be a stilling of mental thought, complete silence of mental thought. In complete silence, one is able to observe the entire being with far more greater maturity. So all of these elements have to be brought in when we talk of this. And Sri Aurobindo goes on to say, there must also be a transformation of the mental substance. Otherwise, the higher light cannot assume the full possession. The perfect equality of the thinking mind is indispensable because the objective of this progress is the greater light which belongs to a higher plane of spiritual experience, spiritual cognizance. Its perfection is impossible so long as the supramental light does not fall fully upon the upward looking mentality. So there are gradations of work on the mind. First he is saying you should have a will for equality. You should want that equality. Then how do you get there? There is a certain silence you have to develop. Then he goes on to say that one has to open to a higher light. Still the mind, meditate, receive the higher light. Then the transformation of the mental faculty can happen. Finally, all this equalization of the nature is a preparation for the highest spiritual equality to take possession of the whole being and make a pervading atmosphere in which the light, power and joy of the divine can manifest itself in man amid an increasing fullness. That equality is the eternal equality of Satchidananda. It is an equality of the infinite being which is self-existent, an equality of the eternal spirit. It will mold into its own mold the mind, heart, will, life, physical being. He describes level by level how this equality helps us ascend to higher planes. It is an equality of the infinite being, and he talked about how all of our being will be cast into that mold of equality. Then he says it is an equality of the divine tapas, which will initiate a luminous action of the divine will in all the nature. So earlier, a passive equality, now an active equality. And then it is an equality of the divine Ananda, which will found the play of a divine universal delight, universal love, and an illimitable aesthesis of universal beauty. Why is he bringing in this element of divine Ananda? Because we talked about 4 stages, right? We talked about the 4 stages: purification, liberation. We are talking of perfection. What is the last one? The last one is delight, Ananda. So he's saying, as we arrive at equality of perfection, we now open to the next stage of the higher consciousness, which is bhukti, the delight of existence, the enjoyment of the universe, which is finally the purpose of this universe. The ideal, equal and perfect action of the infinite through the nature working on the relations of the universe will be the untroubled outpouring of its power in our being. This is the meaning of equality in the terms of integral yoga. So this is the first of the 3 chapters that Sri Aurobindo takes up on equality. There are 3 chapters that will come in. Then he talks about more detail, how do you put equality in action, all of these things that will come in. So that concludes our chapter 11 discussion on perfection of equality. Let us concentrate for a few minutes. Thank the Mother for the opportunity for coming together.